I'm Teisha Bader. Thank you for joining me. We are still reeling from the murders of 6 Israeli hostages in Hamas captivity in Gaza at the end of last month. Their remains recovered in a tunnel in Gaza by the IDF overnight on September the 1st, just a day or two after their murders. Ori Danino, Carmel Gat, Alex Lubinov, Almog Sarusi, Eden Yerushalmi, and Hersh Goldberg-Polin, murdered by Hamas after surviving almost 1 year in horrific conditions, shaking us to our core. Well, CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, went to Israel to mourn together with the country, to pay Shiva calls of condolence to some of the families of the slain hostages, and met with other hostage families whose loved ones are still being held by Hamas in Gaza. And he joins us now upon his return to the United States. Jonathan, it is always such a privilege to have you here.
Very kind of you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So you wrote upon your arrival in Israel that you would do your best to represent us all at these Shiva calls, which we are deeply grateful for. But so many of us are feeling so heartbroken and wish that we could be there in person just to hug these family members. So again, our gratitude for going and being there physically in person. Can you share some of what that was like?
Yes, I can. On Saturday night, after we learned the horrible news about the discovery of the bodies, I called my chief of staff and I said, I'm going to Israel right now. And I wasn't able to get a flight Saturday night after Shabbat. I ended up leaving on Monday morning, first thing. But the fact of the matter is that I felt the need to be there. I felt the need, as you said, to mourn and to grieve with our brothers and sisters in Israel. I deeply believe in Klal Yisrael. I think we are all part of one people, one family. And those who were killed, and you mentioned Ori and Hersh and Carmel and all of them, and Aden, these are like my own children, my own siblings, my own parents. And so this trip was to show solidarity and to show strength. The only way I believe we get through this is together. And in a moment of tremendous polarization in Israel, I think here in this country as well, I think we as a Jewish people can't afford to be divided. We might not agree on everything, but making common cause and coming together to face the threats that endanger us. It's never mattered more so than right now.
And I know among the families that you paid Shiva calls to was the family of Hersh Goldberg-Polin. And, so many people, because his parents, who are just come across as the most remarkable humans, because of how they were so visible to the public and we connected with them so strongly that, of course, we mourn each and every single hostage that was killed. But because his family became so visible and sort of the symbol of the hostages, we all feel like we were connected to them and to Hersh. And I know that one, that was, again, it was all tough, but it really resonated so deeply. And I know they aren't sitting Shiva at their house because there's just not enough room for all the people that are waiting to see them. What was that like, being there with them?
It was remarkable. So indeed, the municipality had set up a very large tent in which people could convene and not just, pray as part of the Shiva, but be together, sort of like convene. And the line, we went there in the morning, and the line of people must have been at least 100, 150 people at whatever time it was, quite early in the morning. And I think, as you said, Rachel and John have such humanity and such decency that radiates throughout everything that they do. And I think that's part of the reason why they managed to connect not just with us as Americans or Israelis, but with the world. I mean, Hersh was their child. And I cannot imagine anything more inconsolable than the loss of a child. And yet I think Hersh also became like a shared child of the world, not just because of his love of geography and travel, which they talked about, not just because he was someone who had a very universal point of view, but because all of us so deeply connected with them as parents, so deeply felt the connectivity with Hersh as a young man on the verge of his whole life. And the sadness that they felt was everywhere. Now, look, I will say that it's a sign of the extraordinary nature of Rachel and John and their strength that when John saw me, he immediately approached me and gave me a hug. And the first thing he said was, we're going to mourn Hersh, but we've got to get the other 101 hostages home. So even in this moment of terrible tragedy, in this moment of unimaginable pain, Rachel and John were still focused on their principle of humanity and seeing Hersh not just as their son, but as one of this, if you will, community of 100 plus hostages, and they're as committed to all of them as they are to their own son. I mean, they are really incredible people whose courage and whose heroism I really admire.
And I know you also visited some extremely painful places, including
Yes.
the site of the Nova Music Festival massacre, where Hersh was, and so many other young people celebrating life, celebrating music. They're just being in a joyful moment when this horrendous nightmare took place.
Yeah.
If you can describe just the physicality of the location and also just the emotion of being there.
Well, look, while I was there, I visited the Nova site, as you said, which, you drive through this like an orchard or a grove of trees. So it's essentially in a forest to get to the site, and then it's a large clearing, and that clearing has been turned into a memorial. There is in this field, this open field, these tall rods. At the top of each rod is a picture like this of a person who was killed on that day. And there are hundreds of these rods with hundreds of pictures, a unique one on each. And each of those rods is in the ground, and people have come and created shrines at the base of those rods. And you see these beautiful young people, these gorgeous, women and men, handsome men. And you see again these young people on the verge of their lives. And what happened to them is just unspeakable. Interestingly, while I was there, Teisha, I happened to find the marker for my youngest son's camp counselor, a young man named Ron Shermer, who was brutally murdered and his body not identified for days and days and days afterwards. We thought he had been kidnapped because they couldn't make an ID. And there he was there, again, captured as the 19-year-old that he was.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's sorry for all of us. Sorry for his mom and his dad and his brother and his sister, but sorry for all of us, because what Hamas did was not just kill these 1,200 plus people and not just steal these 250 people, but I think they killed something in all of us. They stole something from all of us. And I think we're still coping with that. So we went to Nova. We visited Kibbutz Be'eri. This was the second time that I've been there since October the 7th. My colleagues and I planted a tree because the community of Kibbutz Be'eri is committed to rebuilding. And I just bless them for their fortitude. We visited kind of like a car park where the IDF, I think it's the IDF, has put all of the burnt out cars. And there's just a wall of these husks, these skeletal remains of these cars that were torched and destroyed by Hamas. In addition, hundreds of other vehicles that were partially damaged. And they have QR codes in front of them, Teisha, so you can scan it with your phone and learn the story of maybe it was a terrorist truck or a civilian vehicle. We visited Sderot. The city of Sderot is just north of the Gaza envelope, and we sat with the mayor, who said basically, I'm not leaving Sderot. I'm staying right here. And his strength and his resolve was palpable. And yet we also went to the police station, or the site of what had been the police station. As you may, and your viewers at JBS may know, some 26 Hamas terrorists, they came into Sderot and they occupied the police station. They knew where it was, they knew where the key offices were, and they barricaded themselves inside. And it took the IDF and local police nearly 24 hours to dislodge these people. In the end, they ended up destroying the whole building and dropping it on the terrorists. I mean, if these individuals, these terrorists, had gotten a hold of the armory and all of the guns and all the weapons and brought them into Sderot, it could have been a terribly bloody massacre. So all of these sites were heavy, but maybe the heaviest thing was on Thursday night, we went to the Hostage Family Forum, and we met with Malki, the dad, whose son Omer is still one of the hostages, who started the Hostage Family Forum. And you hear his story, Malki Shem Tov, was really heavy. His son has been, they haven't had signs of life from his son in months and months and months. And then we visited with Aviva Siegel, a 62-year-old woman who was held in captivity, held hostage by Hamas for 51 days. She was released in that first wave. And her stories of deprivation, of starvation, of torture and violence were soul crushing. And what she endured only over 51 days, and her husband Keith is still in captivity, like Omer, still being held in Gaza. And my heart breaks for these people, and we need to bring them home now.
Yeah, it's unfathomable, really, Jonathan. And, as we said at the beginning, after October the 7th, how do we process what happened and begin to mourn when the hostages are still being held? And when we still have IDF soldiers, being killed and putting their lives on the line, we can't put a period at the end of the sentence, of this most painful, heartbreaking sentence. And so this agony, and it is very much terror, what Hamas is doing, as you said earlier, taking from us not just these beautiful, incredible souls, each of whom is, as we say in Hebrew, olam bimlo'o, a world unto itself, but this continued torture and waiting and trying to find the hope in these dark, dark days.
I can't agree with you more. Like, agony is the right word. It is this unending agony. And by the way, we're talking about the South. I also visited the north of Israel. And the north of Israel has been under siege since October the 7th. Hezbollah, an Iranian terror proxy, just like Hamas, has been firing missiles and mortars and UAVs, these drones equipped with explosives. One hit a building today in Netzarim. And I was there last December when one of their UAVs hit an IDF position and killed a reservist. Day after day after day after day, scores of missiles are raining down with no condemnation from the international community. Israel responds, and that's all that you see covered on CNN. All that you see covered in the media is the Israeli response. And they never distinguish, when characterize the Israeli response, about the terrorists they hit. They just say X people died. Now, I will say one other point. I went to the town of Julis in the northern Galilee. It's an ancient town. Julis was set up by the Romans. Julis was named after Julius Caesar. And it's today a Druze community. And I met with members of the Druze community, including their communal leader, Sheikh Tarif. And then we went to Majid al-Shams, a Druze town in the Golan Heights. And we visited the soccer field where 6 weeks to the day, 12 children, ages 10 to 16, were killed by a Hezbollah missile. A Hezbollah missile fired at a soccer field. And again, the children killed there, their only offense was kicking around a ball. The shrapnel from this projectile literally shredded bodies. One of the children, they couldn't even find him for days. He had been so, decimated. And I met with the parents of these kids, and I sat with them, and I heard their stories about their beautiful boys and girls, again, 10 to 16. These are Druze people. They have no stake in this fight. And so their deaths were so horrible, and it just underscores the barbarism of Hezbollah and the evil of the Iranians manipulating these groups and killing so many innocents. So it was really hard, and yet there was also hope. The Druze community told me how the next day, a legion of cars from southern Israel drove up. Parents of people who lost their children in 10/7 drove all the way up to the Golan Heights to be in solidarity with this community. And how so many of the Druze were now pressing for Israeli citizenship and wanted to be involved in the IDF after what happened. And I heard the stories from the mom of Uri, one of the young people who was killed, whose Shiva I visited. And she said to me that she would not be here today were it not for the support of the American Jewish community, because she's gotten so much love from American Jewish congregations and communal organizations and just ordinary people. Like, one of the most powerful things in this whole experience, Teisha, is like we're in a moment of great pain, and yet the ability of the Jewish people to come together is renowned and inspiring and gives me so much hope.
Indeed. I mean, it is so important, as you said, to see unity in the Jewish world. And even among, in Israel, we see protests to, seal the deal, get the hostage release, ceasefire deal done. And I think from afar, from here in the U.S., some in the media, perhaps, there are those who try and say, look, Israel is divided and look what's happening here. And you have to see that with real context and perspective. The people of Israel are in pain. And even if the protests are against the government, I think it's so important to keep in mind that the responsibility of what is the reality now, that there are still 101 hostages being held in Gaza, and that 1,200 innocent men, women, children, and babies were murdered on October the 7th, falls squarely on terror group Hamas.
Of course. There's no question you're right about that. There's no question that this whole thing could essentially end tomorrow if Hamas would just release the hostages. And while there's no doubt that Israel will have to make some painful concessions and some difficult choices in the days ahead, that's because of the cynical, evil way that Hamas not just abuses the hostages, these innocent people, but really instrumentalizes their own population. I mean, somebody earlier today described the protesters to me as pro-Palestinian, and I corrected them. You are not pro-Palestinian if you don't work to preserve Palestinian lives, if you don't invest in Palestinian society, if you don't seek a peaceful arrangement with your neighbors. I mean, when you don't do any of those things, you're endangering and jeopardizing Palestinian lives, not doing anything to support them. So I think we need to differentiate between what it means to be pro-Palestinian and what it means to be pro-Hamas, pro-evil, pro-ISIS. That's what these people are. So I say that because it's just stunning to me how many people in the West just don't get it. And by the way, again, I know the Israeli government have to make some painful choices, but this will never end unless pressure is also brought upon Hamas, which means Qatar, Turkey, Egypt. We need to twist arms. We need to bring pressure to bear. And ultimately, unfortunately, Teisha, I think the only way this really ends is when we deal with Iran. Iran is the mailing address of this mayhem. Iran is where it starts, and Iran is where it ends. Deal with Iran, and all of this will be very, very different.
So you mentioned protests, and you're talking about here in the United States, what we're seeing on college campuses, what we're seeing in the streets. And when I knew that you were coming on to speak with us today, I was like, oh, good. Maybe Jonathan will be able to help us understand what we are seeing. Because I think what so many Jews here in America feel, and when I speak to my family in Israel, they're trying to understand how people are holding signs and holding flags in support of terror groups, holding signs that say things like, bring the Intifada home or bring the war home. How do we begin to understand that sentiment that is so hateful and so dangerous?
It is deeply, deeply problematic. So the protest movement, I don't even like to use that phrase.
Yeah,
I think
agreed.
when we talk about protesters, it conjures images of like John Lewis or the Greensboro Four who desegregated the lunch counters in North Carolina. Like, give me a break. That is not who these people are. Again, these people are chanting genocidal slogans. They're justifying barbarism and violence. You can't say you're nonviolent when you fetishize violence. You can't say that you're anti-genocide when you justify the genocide of Jewish people. I'm sorry. Like, you've got another thing coming if you think somehow that is reasonable. It is not. But let's acknowledge that these protesters, we should call them antagonists, might be a better way to describe it. It's not just about Israel. There was a tweet last week from the National Chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine. They wrote, "Divestment is not an incrementalist goal. True divestment necessitates nothing short of the total collapse of the university structure and American empire itself. To divest from this is to undermine and eradicate America as we know it." So those aren't my
what do they
words.
want when they're saying things like this? What is their end goal? What is the picture they have in their minds of what they want the world to be?
They're nihilists. And so what is happening here, this movement, these different antagonists, you have a set of, number one, you have a set of hardcore, like political Islamists who believe in the rhetoric and the aspirations of the Muslim Brotherhood. You have a large number of students who are, and adults, by the way, half the people arrested in the last academic year were not students on these campuses. These are people trespassing, adults who are sort of, anti-capitalist, anarchist types who are against America and against globalization and whatnot. And those two kind of forces are bringing along a lot of other young people who just don't know better, who don't understand what are the dynamics and motives driving them. I think 99 out of 100 young people don't want to sign up to, quote, undermine America itself. They think that this issue is the social justice cause du jour. Little do they know that when, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, credits the protesters, that's not exactly an endorsement you're looking for, right? And when you learn, as the Office of the Director of National Intelligence informed us earlier this summer, that the Iranians are helping to fund these protests, are involved in propagandizing them, you start to realize that maybe things aren't as they seem and people are being manipulated.
And as far as the anti-Semitism we continue to see in this country, Jonathan, I know the ADL is in a constant struggle to follow what is happening, counter what is happening. Just give us sort of a brief synopsis of where you would say we are at now and what you see as the strongest way possible that we can fight this phenomenon, which is very frightening and very disturbing. But obviously, we're not giving up.
Well, we can't give up. I mean, anti-Semitism isn't new. It's been described as the oldest hatred, and it's flared up in recent years. In 4 of the past 5 years, we've hit new highs. Of course, that spiked dramatically after 10/7, but over the last decade, anti-Semitic incidents are up nearly 900% in the United States. Similar numbers in Western Europe, similar numbers in Australia, similar numbers in other in Canada. I mean, it's really quite shocking. Look, I think the issues are taking place on college campuses, as we've discussed. They're taking place in private spaces, work offices, for example, and workplaces. They're taking place in public spaces too. We're seeing that as it relates to these marches and whatnot, where people are carrying PFLP and Hamas and ISIS flags. So look, at the end of the day, it's always darkest before the dawn. And so whereas the data is quite alarming, I'm encouraged to see how many people from both sides, left and right, are coming together and saying enough. I'm proud of the number of the Americans who are demonstrating almost like righteous Gentiles, saying, I've had it with this. And to see people like Ben Stiller and Gwyneth Paltrow and Pink and other prominent celebrities, Gal Gadot, speak up against anti-Semitism matters a lot too. So it's not easy, and we're dealing with some tough issues, but I know that there are more good people than not. And look, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we'll get through this, and I know that we will.
Absolutely. And as you so beautifully quoted Hersh's father, John, in a piece you wrote for the ADL about your trip, about him saying, Od lo avda tikvatenu, we have
right.
not given up hope. Our hope is not lost. And for someone like him to have gone through what he went through, what his wife Rachel and their family is going through, to say, our hope is not lost, despite the pain.
What heroes. I mean, they're just unbelievable people.
Well, Jonathan, again, we're so appreciative that you went to Israel, again, showing up. You know, we all try and show up, but to physically show up is really, I think, so incredibly important and special. And I know so many people have gone to Israel and volunteered and tried to just show with their physical presence that you are not alone. We say this to our fellow Jew. We say this to the people of Israel. We are with you. And we feel at the same time that they are with us, that they express concern for us as far as the anti-Semitism we face as American Jews.
Here.
So it really is, as you said, more important than ever that we are united and that we think of our fellow Jew anywhere in the world. And just thank you for what you and the Anti-Defamation League do on a daily basis. It is so important. And thank you for being in Israel for all of us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Jonathan Greenblatt is CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, and we thank him so much for being here on JBS.
Thank you.